Greetings, programs. Welcome back to Runehammer. I'm Hankerin Fernail. As a supplement to the mind mapping video, as well as a annual ritual that I perform, I'd like to present my Dungeon Master's Journal without any ado. I'm just going to go page by page and show you exactly what has come of almost 1 year of journaling in this book. So you can see I've labeled it there. It's June 2017. So we're a few months short of a year, but I'm starting to move to a different chapter. So I wanted to just go ahead and show this journal. So I always just write something random on the first page just to break that first page sort of syndrome. And so that's what that is. So just to give you a sense of where this book began, this is the Speed Kills adventure, which appears in the 2nd edition index card RPG core book. So once again, you can see just this sort of random order of concepts and drawings that form the adventure. So here's where I was working on the hypercars and who the bad guys were, and then some of the mechanics that make chasing and ramming and crashing work. This is also where chunks was invented. Here we have more of Speed Kills. This is the basic lay of the land as the death race unfolds, and then the battle over the river Styx in the afterlife, and so on and so forth, all being done with these super fast cars. Here we sort of move into some different concepts. Some of these are philosophical ideas that I was working on for videos, and then as well we have an adventure which I think later did this become the Splinters of Iris. Yeah, the Splinters of Iris was a warp shell adventure that was run on XSplit, and I think actually we broadcast that. So if you can look up that video and find that. But it was a side view adventure, so we played kind of Metroid style. So again, just getting my bullets for the adventure, getting a basic map, and then a few ideas for how these little crabs were going to pop out of crystals and stuff. And here's a picture of Socrates. What do we have here? So here we have, you guys may have seen last summer the video called Drawing Basics, and this is where I was figuring out what I really wanted to say in that video about pulling your lines and doing repetitions and stuff. Here's more notes about the Splinters of Iris adventure. So you can see sometimes I jump pages in the journal and it just goes in its own order. And then, what is the utility of any of these particular drawings? Who knows, but they help me see the adventure. And then here's where I'm making a mess tracking hit points. Wow, so this is where I started to actually figure out what were going to be the contents of the Index Card RPG Worlds book. So these were 20 adventure and story seeds that I knew I wanted inside the 2 different worlds. And I just sort of listed them out, just brutal style. And this actually changed and evolved quite a bit, but this at least got me started. Initially, I was going to do a 1d20 system where you could kind of roll to select and stuff, but it became so much more. So first of all, we have some notes here on a video that I did about knowing the whole truth and using more dilemmas and stuff like that. But then also we have the infamous Children of Azathoth, which later came to be known as the Viking Death Squad. This is where the adventure was planned. And you can see just sort of how random this sort of sequence of thoughts is and maps. And then I knew that Satan was going to be involved. But yeah, that's the one that I ran at the Absolute Tabletop Con last year in Tacoma. And here's Viking Death Squad continued. This is basically just seeing who the PCs would be, since it's pre-generated PCs for the players. And then, taking notes while I was listening to Ozzy Osbourne and getting the couplets from the lyrics and then using that to drive the adventure of the story. Next, this is a project that has not been completed yet that I keep sort of starting and stopping because I'm just not sure I want to bring it to market, called Spectroid. And this is my pixel art Metroid tribute card game. So this is actually, has some good work done on it, but I just can't decide if really card games are that useful of a product for me to be publishing. They're really fun to make, but they tend to kind of disappear from the market really quickly, and the competition, obviously, with things like Magic and stuff is really stiff. But here's when I was working on the card list. More about Spectroid over here, about figuring out some of the mechanics. And then Beneath the Door, which is another adventure that appears in the Index Card RPG core book. And this is my Lovecraft horror game that we also streamed online, so you can look that up if you like to. But it's basically the story of this explorer who brings this rock, this sort of crystal, back from his adventures, and it winds up sort of tearing his family apart and cursing his whole home with evil. Here's toying with an idea for a moment about a Vietnam setting book, where actually Vietnam was a cover for a war against these aliens that came out from under the earth. And I was kind of experimenting with that idea and wondering where it was going. And then we come all the way back to some of these hover bikes and stuff, which were part of the Speed Kills adventure. Little did I know I would start drawing machines like this for quite a while, which, you know, you'll come all the way full circle down to Junked, which is just my current project. But it's crazy to see that I had started doing that way back then. Okay. Here's more on Beneath the Door. So this is the final encounter for Beneath the Door, the NPCs, and then here we have like 20 details that can be discovered with perception rolls and how they fit into the story, how to run horror, and all this stuff founded into the core book. Here we were designing some logos for my friend Matt Shaker, and then also just some sort of deep thinking that every once in a while I get into. It's these sort of stanzas or cantos that are kind of like a lot of self-affirmation as well as a lot of creative affirmation, saying, hey, you can do this, and like be creative and be yourself and be honest in life. And I know that stuff can seem corny sometimes, but to me it's really important, and I think it can be important to people struggling with creative challenge. So again, here's trying to plan out the ICRPG Worlds book and drawing a little bit of a blank so you can see what happens when the ideas just don't flow. I kind of just get stuck with this blank page. And then here was right when Runehammer on Patreon as a podcast was first envisioned. So that's come a long way since then, and that's kind of crazy. Just making more work for myself. It's just so fun to do projects. I just can't help it. And now here is the very beginning of the Xenomorph Dead Zone, Xenomorph Dead Zone, this is working on a GM-less board game system. And I wanted to do something with xenomorphs. And I just started thinking about how dice could be used, especially after getting some cool dice, like some of those more high-tech looking dice. And I just wanted to play around with the idea of making a xenomorph board game. This is some kind of fish guy. A talking head is both an adventure sort of encounter concept as well as a short story that can be found on Patreon. And here's where I was sort of crisscrossing those two ideas. Again, this idea of clocks, which can be found mainly in Blades in the Dark by John Harper. The clock idea, I really, really was excited about that clock idea and how failure causes time to count down in a game design. And so I was working on my Xenomorph board game idea with clocks as some of the central concept about failure, and then working on how the characters are built and maybe some map ideas. Here's more for Xenomorph Dead Zone, which is coming up with some planet ideas and what the countdowns and the clocks could be, and then starting to design a sequence of 3 maps would be like a ship, a base, and a hive. And again, you can see when I draw a blank, when I start to either run out of momentum or interest, and the detail just kind of trails off. And to me, that's okay. That's all part of the experience of exploring what you're interested in. Oh, here's Charlie. This is for my pirate game that I played in, where we're the crew of the Helen's Revenge. So Charlie is a sort of a bard, a sort of a confused bard is his character. Here's one of the Lair of Knowledge videos where I was taking notes on comparing Blades in the Dark and Torchbearer and just making sure I had a grasp on those systems. Here's just rolling up the Beast for a Cryphoth game. And actually, he kind of got a little bamboozled or flummoxed there in that first game, and so he found his way into the Burning in New Haven story, which is on Patreon, because I liked the character so much, I couldn't accept that he was just going to perish in that first adventure. And then here we have another Warp Shell adventure. This is the one where we fought over that bridge. If you guys have seen that, this stream is also available online if you care to watch. But this is just plotting it out in the sort of 4 moments of the adventure and what the key bullets for those moments could be. Again, using the sort of timer threat treat method. Here's my character, Silence. This is another Warp Shell adventure series, which I think we've done about 4 of these now, or maybe 3. I really love this character. This is a Zill character who creates little machines and devices and kind of doesn't understand humanity. Really fun to play this guy. And then this is an adventure that I never actually brought to a video or to the table, called Twilight of the Thunder Gods. Again, this is an adventure inspired by a song by Amon Amarth. But I had this specific adventure where Mjolnir had been stolen from Thor and kept in this vault, and needed to go get it, and Thor has actually gone crazy, and you have to battle him. But I wanted to build an adventure based on skill challenges and how they played out in a sequence, and I still like this idea, I just kind of have never brought it to the table. Here's just drawing some little objects and doodads for Ghost Mountain and starting to see what Ghost Mountain was going to be. And this is the very first sketch of the Ghost Mountain map. And then getting more into it and what actually happens in the Ghost Mountain campaign. And if you look in the ICRPG Worlds book, this is where the Ghost Mountain campaign kind of came to life. The story of Hat Martins and the Dead Pinnacles and all that stuff. Here's the designing the initial spell list for Ghost Mountain, and that evolved over time a little bit, but this was sort of the first list of what could make it feel different. And then here was, again, working on this Xenomorph board game concept. Still struggling with it to use the clocks and really find a way, and I was trying to find danger ratings and just not quite finding a harmonic click. So a lot of you guys have seen my dungeon building video. This is just thinking out the notes. And I think this is a really good example of mind mapping, is like exactly what's going on here. It's literally thinking, trying to get my thoughts to be clear by listing them out in this kind of crazy way. Here, again, dungeon building, just trying to think through it and keep my brain moving, keep interested. Return to Westburg, yes. So this is where we come back with the Rangers of Numidia, and there's kind of all this stuff happening in this map, and everybody, I think, is familiar about some of this stuff, the unkillables, and using some elements from all over the place, and a lot of different parts and pieces from different adventures are coming together here. We are not here, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, wow. It's crazy to always look back on this. Gar War. Now, a lot of you guys know about Rocket Pig Games. They sent me a great little set of villager miniatures. And I was so taken with the style and the feel of these little characters, I actually wanted to work on a game concept that would use them. And so I came up with this idea called Gar War, which was, it's sort of like a tavern war idea. It's a tavern board game where there's like brawls and monsters in a tavern, but you're also making and serving beer. And like so many different ideas, I just never found the moment where it felt perfect. And so it just starts to lose momentum. It starts to lose, what am I doing? Like, are there torches? Is there a bar? Are there tables? And then how do you... And that's okay. When you don't see an idea coming together, it's okay. Sometimes just entertaining it is the key. Here's designing a lot of the key mechanics or final mechanics for Ironheart. Now, Ironheart has been a game that's been worked on for almost 5 years now, but this was when I was starting to think, hey, maybe I could actually publish Ironheart, and I think this could be really cool. And then we're getting into this phase that I had about the Tesseract and the Octocoron. So this is a bit of a convoluted concept to describe to everybody, but I got into this mindset of making this sort of baffling board game where even trying to understand what the board game was part of the fun. And I got into this whole cryptographic puzzle called the Atham Octocoron. Now, I feel a little crazy about revealing this in my journal right now because I kind of still thought about publishing it, but I honestly just think for the sake of transparency and full honesty, we'll go ahead and show it. So you'll see it in the next few pages. Captain Reeves is another character of mine from another Warp Shell game. Here's the straight dungeon concept with a perfectly straight tunnel, the Tunnel of Hathor. And here we're getting into the Atham Octocoron. This is this massive cryptographic puzzle, which I was going to portray in the form of a board game. And even figuring out how to play the board game is kind of the puzzle. And so I'm using these strange number systems and a scrambled up cryptographic alphabet. And then I was going to hide it in all these historical clues and these weird text blobs and everything. And I still really like the idea. I just think that it would be very hard to bring to market in a way that people could understand what they're buying, what they're getting into. And so, I feel kind of comfortable just revealing here a lot of these strange charts and cryptographic sort of diagrams that would reveal how to read the book. Like parts of the book would just be scrambled text. So again, here's working on the codified alphabets, the sort of hand number system, and then actually drawing a tesseract in 2D so that you can actually see a 24-sided cube. And the whole way that you were going to decode the library was to, break apart this cube, and it had letter cues written on it, and a lot of crazy ideas were going to come together here in the Octocoron. Ghost Mountain. So this is when I was running the Ghost Mountain game with my ICRPG group and starting to see where this was all going. We're growing the Slayer, which was an adventure inspired by Pumpkinhead. Here's where initially I was going to have a lot more monsters included in Warp Shell, but it just got sort of cleaner and cleaner over time. And then the loot chain system, which eventually became milestone paths, which is the more advanced character progression system that's in ICRPG Worlds. But this is where it started. So at one point I was actually going to think about using a dungeon to explain a book. And so I was going to use a dungeon as a table of contents, and I wanted you to see how we were going to work our way through these concepts. And at this time, I was really experimenting with how Worlds was going to feel, what I was going to do after Worlds. This is the next chapter of the Ghost Mountain game. So you see I'm doing some maps and some bullets over here. This is my first idea for the Snow Orcs, which are these kind of fur-clad, heavy armor orcs. So here we have more. This is Tucson Comic-Con when I ran an ICRPG game there and getting this sort of figured out. I used the Darkest Dungeon miniatures, ran a couple of really fun games at Tucson Comic-Con. This is more on decoding the cryptogram for the Octocoron. Like this is really one of the better diagrams that I did. So each dot would represent a decodable surface on this 24-sided cube. And the whole thing just got really crazy. I still like the idea, but how exactly would you bring that to market, and how would you know who would be interested in it and so forth? That's the toughest part. 9 Blessings. Yeah, so this was Halloween or Samhain of last year, and I just wanted to put good vibes out to the world, and it wound up being a dark, cold, soggy holiday, but still good to get some deep thinking out and talk about random in my journal. Dark Sun, yes, so this is getting ideas down for starter adventures for Dark Sun. Wow, so this was Halloween night, sitting and having a beer and drawing this in multiples of 24. So each time I would draw a line, I would draw 24 lines, which is, again, this tesseract idea. And I did that several times, and this took several hours to draw this. Is really like that drawing. That's a crazy one. And that's just working right in pen, too, so it's really fun to see those come together. Here's the 3rd chapter of the Ghost Mountain adventure with the guys doing the campaign. So again, just bullet points and all that crazy stuff. And then, getting my notes out on what was going to happen later in the Burning in New Haven. Applying that same kind of drawing technique of drawing in multiples to sort of a Cryphoth themed sort of piece, an engraving in a way. Wow, here we see a lot of chaos. This is working on the milestone paths for the classes in ICRPG Worlds, and this was a real conceptual struggle for me, so that's when you can see how dense everything gets, because I know I want to push through and make it, but there's a lot to think through. And then anytime you see these number messes, that's just tracking hit points from a game. Again, here we are working on a card game concept I wanted to do called Planet Gear Monster, which is sort of another version of Spectroid. And again, I always come to this point where I'm like, do I really need to do a card game? Like, I'm not sure that the competitive landscape is conducive to doing a card game. Then next, we're working on some short stories for Patreon, an RPG Talks bullet set here. Here, designing sort of how cards could be used to sort of cut these tunnels in a sort of a conceptual planet. and then more detail on how this sort of Planet Gear monster idea could work. I still like the idea, but again, there's a lot of things to do. So what do you do first? Oh, here's the excitement when I discovered Relic Blade, and Relic Blade is fantastic. Everybody should check it out. But it's also was mind expanding a little bit, action dice and so forth. And then, exactly how could I run a GM-less like skirmish game? And this was just all the thinking involved with a skirmish game. And then I started seeing my Hell World project coming together. See, here you go, the legendary DM-less game. So for a minute there, it was really on my mind, can I run a no-DM skirmish game and make it cool? And then here's where I was starting to think it out. I'm still working on ICRPG Worlds in the background, so there's a drawing that later inspired the final drawing for that. But this is just asking myself these questions, can I invent a no-DM skirmish game? Never really finished that. That's a tough one. More monsters for Worlds. And then, again, a DMing Ghost Mountain and thinking about this sort of crazy, like, scrambled landscape on Xenos. Yes, and here's where I started working on Path of Doom, which may become one of my primary projects in 2018, which is my Choose Your Own Adventure series. And this is trying to see exactly how that could work. And then here, back to this sort of Tesseract Octocoron puzzle and trying to figure it out, and then working on how I could do Choose Your Own Adventure. But this is asking myself questions, trying to give answers, bulleting the answers, and so on and so forth. So I'm really letting you see behind what seems like ideas that I seem to have, but they all start with lots of confusion. This is working on the brand for my Choose Your Own Adventure series, which has wound up being called Path of Doom, and as well as the mechanics that are used. It isn't just a Choose Your Own Adventure book. It actually has resources and mechanics to it. And then here's working on logo forms and text ideas for the Path of Doom logo, which you guys will be seeing coming this year. As that begins to unfold. More thinking on how the Tesseract could look on the board. And here is still working on Path of Doom, and this is just trying to see how a Choose Your Own Adventure book could use systems and resources to be more of a game rather than just a book. And really struggling to see how the choices could be meaningful. Here's Scar, who is one of my longest players, or characters that I've had in a while. I think we're on session 10 of Kryphoth right now, and Scar is my gladiator in that game. And again, I'm just keeping notes on the sessions here of like what happens, the details of the sessions. Silence in his maybe third session, I think, and just updating his character sheet. I've been lucky enough to play in a lot of games this past year. Here just working on some sketch ideas for Kryphoth characters. None of these find their way into any final projects, but they just help me see through some concepts. Again, working on sort of, shape ideas for Kryphoth as that book has been coming together. Just thinking about characters and how their bodies and their faces and their equipment and stuff, their poses could all come together. Here's 3 poses that I like, and those kind of found their way into the painted work. Orcs. Wow, so here is a really big project, Fire and Ice, which I hope you guys saw that video. Really proud of that video, but this is the map that I did for Fire and Ice of how this colossal 2-sided elemental temple could really work in a game. Haven't gotten the chance to run this at a table yet, but I would love to someday. This would take more than a night. This is a big adventure in a very big dungeon, and more just notes on the rooms. I often do that. I'll start drawing things out, and then over here I'll have numbered notes that go with the map. Oh, here's where I really started to get traction on Path of Doom and how my Choose Your Own Adventure books could actually be structured. Corporal Hanks, this guy actually wound up getting killed in Alex Alvarez's Xenomorph game that we played. He got killed. And this is Pablo Guterres, Alonso Munoz, who is my character from Deadlands. So Deadlands, got my whole character laid out here. And then while we were playing, I was just doodling in my book. we didn't have a lot of terrain or maps. It was mostly theater of the mind. And when I play theater of the mind, I like to draw while we're playing. So I just kept drawing Pablo and his gear. His rifle is called Piquita. Here's mi tequila. I really enjoyed Pablo. He was a really cool character. Kind of a humble but awesome character. And here we go, just more doodling and drawing while we were playing Deadlands. Su pierna es malo. Still doodling, and then came back to pages that had been doodled on and started working on The Fall of Arnor and Death on Krell, which is the space dogfight game. And I had some room here in the journal, so I just put it right in here. But these were the mechanics that can be found in the second edition core, which should be out in a few weeks, of how those dogfights are going to work. And here we have more card games, trying to figure it out and still trying to find something that I really like. And then also getting into the Deadly Architect and wondering, like, what really comes next here? Trying to see the future of Runehammer. And here's just taking time to think about a project that I have been working on and see where it's going. And a lot of times I'll just do a larger, crazier drawing to just sit and think. Because staring at a piece of paper helps me think rather than, say, watching TV or, being outside or driving or something like that. And then just working on these cover ideas for this book. This is also where Heroes of the Hammer kind of was invented. And then here is this adventure that you found in Mind Mapping, which is the rescue of stills of Thusham. And how this dungeon sort of fits together and how Durathrax was going to be in here. And maybe it's a Fiasco game that I wanted to run. This is when I got Fiasco in the mail and I was thinking about Fiasco, and I could plot out a dungeon but play it with Fiasco, and crazy. And here I've been sort of working on this kind of this sort of love story, and that's part of that. This is a dungeon that is not complete yet. So you see I did the map, and you're about to where I am in the book. So I've done the map and I've done the list of numbers, but there's nothing there because I'm not done yet. This is like you're almost caught up with me. And then here is more of Scar, and here's the actual notes for the mind mapping video and Cryfoth notes. Here's more Cryfoth, and then Scar got a new set of armor, and I was kind of doodling on what that new set of armor could look like. And here's, as usual, trying to figure out where to put my priority in my work. And then more podcast notes. So the Art of Escalation is on the podcast if you care to listen to that. And then exactly how different systems play into escalation. And these are the kinds of notes that I use when I'm doing the RPG mainframe on Patreon. And here now we are finally up to the present. You can tell because this page is so smooth. This is the Junked project. And actually it's come a long way from this point. But this is working on my car combat board game. And there it is right there. So that's... well, what is that? That's about 9 months of journaling. And I only made one mistake with this journal, which is that I got a journal that is way too big. So after all that work, I'm less than halfway through this book. So that's a little disheartening. So I won't get a book this big again. I mean, look how much that is. And it's still, less than half. So that's a little disheartening. I would like to be done with this journal app at this point because I feel like I'm moving into a new chapter, especially with a game like Junked. Getting a little more into sci-fi, getting a little bit into car combat, and just, always seeking the new next crazy. And there it is, my friend. That is every page in my journal since last June. So not quite a year, but almost a year of work right there for your enjoyment. So I hope this helps you with your journaling and just reveals to you just how chaotic really some of the background can be for this wonderful hobby that we all enjoy so much. See you next time.